And I said it was an app chain and I got yelled at.
Hammered the base sequencer 1.5 million times with transactions, and they landed 10 of those successfully.
Unrealized versus realized volatility. Like if it goes up and back down, but you don't realize that change in volatility, then it's not good for LPs.
The operators don't want to trust the user to run it locally because they don't want to give away the training weights, right? Which is really the secret sauce.
Why didn't we consider 100 millisecond block times? Or did we? And was 250 a better choice?
They call that God mode.
Welcome back to The Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Rollup. For today, we have Robert and Hasu from Flashbots. Robert, Hasu, how you guys doing today? Welcome on.
Good. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, doing great. Thanks. Thanks for having us, Andy and Robbie.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for coming. Been following your work for a very long time and appreciate the contributions that you guys have made all across the space in Ethereum land, Rollup land, the MEV space as well. We're going to talk all about it today. Wanted to start with the work that you guys have done on Unichain. I think that was one of the most relevant app chains that have gone live as of recently. You guys were very fundamental in the white paper.
It's not an app chain, bro. It's a DeFi focused chain. Come on.
All right. Okay. It's a DeFi focused chain.
Hey, I got yelled at on Twitter for that. That's all I'm saying. I said it was an app chain and I got yelled at. So,
all right. So maybe we can clarify this today. Is Unichain an app chain? And we'll get into a lot more around Unichain today too.
It's an interesting question. I'm not exactly sure what the definition of an app chain is these days. So that's one place to start. The way that I think we see it at Flashbots, and you'd have to ask our friends at Unichain also how they see it. The way that we see it is that Unichain is purpose built. So it is purpose built for their specific use case. We have added all sorts of interesting things that make it better for their use case. And really the use case is how do you make on-chain trading as good as possible? And if you think about that, you come up with the design for Unichain. So you make block times as fast as possible to reduce the LVR on on-chain LPing, as well as giving users the best user experience possible. And so you get to kind of 250 millisecond block times. How else do you improve the user experience? You add on free reverts, which is another part of the Flashbox feature that we have. And how do you create the best environment possible for applications? Well, you enable MEV internalization through priority fee ordering. And if you kind of take that a few more steps, you need to make that credible somehow. And we've done that by layering on a trusted execution environment. And so we kind of backed out the design for Unichain from this purpose of how do you make it the best place within crypto for on-chain trading. With that being said, it is not an app chain in my mind because it's not a single app. It is still the EVM. It is still Turing complete. You can deploy a smart contract that does whatever you want. And Uniswap, with its Uniswap v4 design, is actually pursuing a platform strategy where anyone can deploy Uniswap pools with arbitrary logic instead of just having a single monolithic application on the chain. So it's this interesting design, which is not entirely, generalized copy-paste EVM, and not entirely an app chain, but somewhere in the middle where it's built for this very specific purpose and tuned for the very specific purpose of making great apps and making great on-chain trading experience. So we think of it as purpose-built, and we think that's going to be a trend that you will see across many other rollups too.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Hasu?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, I agree with all of that. I think personally that this delineation between app and chain, I think it's increasingly just becoming not very useful. as a mental model to make sense of the space. So, I mean, we were starting from this idea, there's one chain and many apps, right? And then, we had started to have like more chains, but like many apps, but also more chains. And then some apps started to be on many chains, but they are kind of the same, right? So Uniswap is already on many chains, right? Same as Aave and so on. But what does that mean? But then some chains basically some apps decided to leave and make their own chain. And, as Robert is saying, they basically better customize what the chain is doing, right? But now, all of a sudden, if you are starting to see on one chain apps that are effectively saying we are kind of upstreaming or like unbundling things that the chain has been doing, we're doing it ourselves. So I'm talking about app-specific sequencing, for example, where you're going to have a Uniswap pool. I mean, let's talk about CowSwap actually, because they have been live for 3 years. So CowSwap is app-specific sequencing, just nobody was talking about it. Why? Because they are determining their own transaction ordering for their batch auction that they are running. So that they are doing this pre-processing stage of transactions, right? And so they are already, in a sense, they are already their own chain, right? They are just as much their own chain as a layer 2 is their own chain, because CowSwap is, in a sense, it's a layer 2. Like a layer 2 is just like ordering transactions off chain and then bundling them and posting them to the layer 1. CowSwap is also ordering their transactions off chain, bundling them and posting them to the layer 1, right? And so, all of a sudden you can see there's actually no difference between CowSwap and the layer 2. And so I think, for all of those reasons, I think this, this like mental model where you have separate chains and you have apps and you can really like map them to each other, I think that's increasingly like no longer useful. You just got to ask what's best for the specific business, what's best for the specific use case. Like what are the things that I want to do? What are the things that I want to outsource? First of all, what do I need for my users? And then where can I get it, right? And I think with Uniswap specifically, there just wasn't any alternative, right, for what they wanted, right? Like if you want to trade on chain, I mean, if you want to provide the best trading experience on EVM, you can look at centralized exchanges, and they are pretty much the benchmark for this, right? You have like very fast transaction execution. You have like no front running, as far as we know, although we don't know, right? On centralized exchanges, are there people who have like some kind of privileged access to like your order flow? They can front run you the matching engine on FTX for sure. It was happening. At least we have heard people talk about it, right?
They call that God mode.
God mode, yeah. And I mean, on Binance also, it's like pretty well known that they sell every exchange sells co-location rights to market makers, right? So already like people are not trading on the same terms, right? This is not a service that's open. If you're like more of a retail, trader, then you don't have that same access, right? And so, if you want to really recreate something like this on EVM, there's just no alternative, right? And so, we just talked to them about if you can have anything you want, what is the best trading experience that you want to give your users, right? And then we try to build it.
All right, lots to unpack there, and I think that the core point Robert made first, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and Hasu kind of really added on there, is that I think our mental model of this idea of chains is going to be changed, right? Where we've been in the space, doing on-chain transactions for 5 years now, and so we have this way that we believe the space has developed, and that influences our thesis going forward for where it's going to go. But the reality is, I think new users just come in through apps. Like they are not really caring about the chain, especially if this whole account abstraction and chain abstraction concepts come to fruition. The reality is users come in through apps. And from our perspective, we tend to think they're going to be purpose-built app chains, purpose-built chains, whatever you want to call them. And so I think that notion is something that a lot of builders and people in the space should be thinking about, rather than this kind of chain-centric future. It's more of like this app-centric future. And then you can even spin that all the way to being like this intent-centric future, where rather than users wanting to use apps, they just want to express an intent and have that action kind of operate on chain. And so that, I think that we at the Rollup have been pushing that both of those ideas pretty strongly. And it's good to see that Unichain is like a validation of that, of this kind of like modular thesis, of this app-centric thesis, as well as like the practical benefits of the actual user experience. Now, to kind of like dive into a bit more of the technical side of the user experience, there's a lot of technical terms here that I think that we want to unpack for our community. And so the first one being what Robert was mentioning with regards to the block times. So we did a podcast with Alex Nesbolin and Yuki about LVR and app-specific sequencing. And I would like to kind of further understand more deeply how the idea of 250 millisecond block times on Unichain reduces LVR and increases the experience for LPs, and then how this broader idea of increasing the experience for LPs or making the experience better then helps users for Unichain. So if you guys could just break that down for us a bit, that would be great, and kind of how that ties into the broader idea with TEs as well.
You want to shoot, Hasu?
Sure. So I think the theory behind why lower block time lowers LVR is just that basically the more you chop up time, the more trades can happen in the same time period. Like the more profitable arbitrage trades there are, and the more fees the LP can thus kind of internalize from that. So back when Uniswap launched, I think there was a lot of discussion around the idea whether, just like how much LPs are getting killed in these AMMs, and if it, how we should even think about like the idea of kind of impermanent loss. And Caroline put out this a good paper on their research blog, and it was basically making the point that very unintuitively, like the lower you make the fees, very often it actually reduces AVR for LP. So like you basically decrease, like you decrease the tick size like as low as possible. Why? Because then basically as the price fluctuates, you have more of this volatility harvesting effect, right? Because as an LP, if the price goes up and then goes back down again, that's actually extremely good. So like volatility per se is good for you. But there's a lot of path dependence, like, in there. I mean, not path dependence, that's the wrong word, because AMMs are fundamentally path independent.
You mean like unrealized versus realized volatility? Like if it goes up and back down, but you don't realize that change in volatility, then it's not good for LPs.
Yeah, I mean, for basically, I mean, you should probably talk to like one of the LVR experts on this, but yeah, basically, for it basically, I mean, if the price ends somewhere where you didn't start, that's bad for you, and then volatility is bad. But if you end near where you started, the volatility is actually been good for you. And this is exactly the scenario under which you want the block time to be lower, and you want like the fees to be lower, because then actually more, you basically can generate more fees from the same volatility. So you can like volatility harvest better.
Yeah. Well then, Hasu, why wasn't that? I mean, I know that wasn't your choice, right? But why didn't we consider 100 millisecond block times, or did we? And was 250 a better choice?
We did consider 100 millisecond block times. Really, the reason why we chose 250 milliseconds is that is about someone's reaction time. So it provides an basically instant experience for users when you're transacting. You probably can't really feel the difference between 100 milliseconds and 250 milliseconds. I mean, I guess maybe if you're like a CSGO pro, you might be able to, if you're like a phenomenal reaction time. But for most people, 250 milliseconds is basically instant. And we wanted to start there, because this is cutting edge, super performant software, and we may end up reducing it from 250 milliseconds to even lower from there. Another sort of related idea that we've kicked around with the Uniswap folks and some other people is the idea that maybe we can have Uniswap pools that in times of high volatility, they end up settling off-chain at a really fast pace, basically just for bots or market makers. on your L2, you have a pool that if the price on Binance has a lot of volatility or something like that, it turns into an L3 with 1 millisecond block times. And you can trade super fast against that, and it collapses back down when there's lower volatility. And I really like that idea.
Which is yet another data point to the model of like chains mapping to apps and vice versa, like breaking down, because you can have one app that's going to utilize many chains, like at the limit every single Uniswap pool should be a layer 3 or a layer 4, whatever you want to think about it.
Right. And one reason why you might want that separation where you have a pool that has super fast block times, and then the L2, which has fast block times but not turbo fast, is because we're sensitive to the eventual decentralization of the sequencer of Unichain and other chains. And the faster that you're going, 100 millisecond block times, 50 millisecond block times, whatever it is, the faster that you're going, the more difficult it is to decentralize. So we feel good about having some level of decentralization with 250 millisecond block times, and we are trying to take it slowly so we don't build something that is impossible to decentralize in the future.
I can build on that as well. So I would add that another reason why we didn't go below 250 milliseconds so far, actually it has to do with the idea that we're still running an MEV auction. It's just a really fast MEV auction that's happening inside this, inside these flash blocks, as we're calling them, right? And so maybe to zoom out, like what Flashbots is doing overall is we're running these MEV auctions, which is these explicit auctions, basically for MEV, for basically getting your transaction placed in specific orders and specific conditions in the block. And so we're really doing a very specific, we're doing an explicit auction for transaction execution. And so the idea behind this is that there are in any financial system, in any blockchain, there are basically always incentives to cause like a specific state change to happen, because that like one state of the world is more valuable for you than another. Right? To give you kind of a very basic example, if I can be the first person to arbitrage this Uniswap pool against this balancer pool, then I'm making more money. And I prefer this version of the world to the one where you are the first person to arbitrage that pool, right? And so we always, we have people who want to get specific transactions mined and who have a financial incentive to actually, go and cause that change somehow, right? And so as chain designers, also increasingly as app designers, I keep coming back to this because it's so important that this line will keep blurring. We have an incentive to, or our goal should be to make this auction happen as efficiently and kind of as less damaging as possible, right? And so this is what we have been referring to for a long time as the MEV trilemma, which is just the idea that your MEV will be extracted one way or the other, and you can choose how. And if you can do an explicit auction, and then people are bidding, they are bidding basically with like in the gas price, and so they are bidding to the bundle that's paying the most. They get exactly their wishes executed. But other chains are making other priorities, and often like implicitly, right? Because they are saying, we don't have MEV, we don't care, we don't want to acknowledge this or embrace this. And then what happens is, of course, not that they don't have any MEV, but rather that the MEV is extracted in other forms through a latency auction, or typically a spam auction. And you see it on, for example, Base, you see it on Solana, and these are often chains that have very low transaction fees. And what happens there is basically people, they do what we call on-chain searching. So they are basically write whatever their bundle would do, but they write in a smart contract, and they just hammer that smart contract every single block. So they ping it repeatedly, and every time the smart contract tries to execute let's say, a specific arbitrage, and 99% of the time it'll fail, and then you pay like a little bit of gas fees. But 1% of the time it may succeed, right? And you're making a lot of money, you know? And this is profitable for the searchers. That's why they're doing it. But it's terrible. It's terrible for the blockchains. It's terrible for the users, because at sometimes you see like 30, 40% of the overall gas of the chain is used up by these, reverted transactions, right? And so, if you have these non-explicit forms of auction, it can look good for you for a time in a debate on social media, but it will always backfire kind of in the real world.
To give some data on this, a couple of weeks ago on Base, there was a single searcher that hammered the Base sequencer 1.5 million times with transactions, and they landed 10 of those successfully. They had a 1 in 150,000 rate of success on their transactions to try to extract MEV.
Wow, that's where the side of Rollup-Boost comes in, where basically is it completely free transaction reverts? Is that the
right? So if you send a transaction as a searcher, you're doing your MEV searching on chain, blah blah blah, and it's not successful, then your transaction is not included on chain. And this is not just good for MEV, but it is actually scaling infrastructure too. Because out of those 1.5 million failed transactions, they're using gas in the block. This bot got up to 20% of the blocks within Base for an extended period of time. And that 20% is gas that could have been used by users making normal trades, could have been used by, games, whatever else people want to do on Base. But instead, it's just this bot that is churning through failed arbitrageurs, basically. And it's even worse when you think about the fact that in perpetuity, for the rest of history, every single full node is going to need to store that state and repeat all of those arbitrages, the 1.5 million, just so the searcher could get, these 10 successful trades out of that 1.5 million. But with the revert protection that we offer, those failed trades, they don't land on chain. Instead, they're just set off to the side, and only successful trades end up being executed and landing on chain, which frees up gas for everybody else to transact instead. And we think this is necessary to scale these chains because, maybe we'll get to a gigagas per second, a billion gas per second, but 990 million of it is actually just used up by MEV searchers on chain trying to find arbs or whatnot.
Yeah, not exactly the gigagas era that we envisioned. And I think part of the importance of this is the reality that users on L2s, I think you can clearly make the argument objectively that they're more likely to be uninformed flow than users on an L1, specifically Ethereum, whether it because of the size of the trades or because of the type of user, where they come from. Think about if you onboard your friend through Coinbase wallet onto Base, things like this. So I think there's a real call to action and need to protect users on L2s going forward. And so that is the core importance that I see of Rollup-Boost as a whole. And so I think all of these technical design ideas and philosophy are basically oriented around that reality. Is that the right way to think about it, or?
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is kind of the other thing that we can connect it to, right? Which is just if you're onboarding to a layer 2, then you've only ever seen this side kind of the user experience of crypto, right? You have much faster blocks. You never had to worry much about MEV because you have a centralized sequencer. It tends to execute transactions in order. At least it's not showing these transactions to anyone else, as far as we know. But of course, this is happening is this happening by outsourcing all of this to a trusted third party, right? And I mean, this has brought a lot of new users into crypto and has really helped blockchains, catch up to centralized exchanges in terms of trading experience and so on, and app developer experience. But it does come at the cost. If you have this much better UX system, how do you decentralize it? Right? We have made these choices on the layer 1 for a reason, right? If we knew how to build a decentralized system that has 1 second block time or even less, and that doesn't suffer from MEV and all of those nice things, then we would have built it a long time ago, right? And so it has been the case that you were able to make these UX improvements for users by sacrificing the decentralization we have on the layer 1, and by instead putting a centralized sequencer, trusted third party in this place. And that's not long-term compatible with what we're trying to do here. And so what do rollups do, right? They have been put into this position where they are competing on user experience. Like once the first rollup started to lower the block time and put a centralized sequencer in place, it was like off to the races, right? Like if you didn't follow suit, then users would just migrate to the like faster, cheaper layer 2 that was quote unquote more centralized, right? And for a really long time, I think these rollups didn't really know they wanted to decentralize, but they were also forced by the competitive pressure in their respective part of the market to make these centralizing choices. And I think this is where Rollup-Boost comes in, which is, I think it's for the first time giving you a vision for how this stuff can be decentralized long term without sacrificing the UX that we have gotten these users used to. I would argue making the UX even better.
Yeah, from the user perspective, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf. Like, we keep going to where the best UX is. We keep going to where the best UX is, but then we only care about decentralization once it matters, right? Once the wolf has gotten to us. And so, we keep like Solana has been able to achieve fast UX, 400 millisecond block times because they centralized their nodes in a geographical region. Same thing with rollups. We go there because they have fast UX, but they have centralized sequencers. And so you guys have been able to essentially put together this paradigm where we can have the fast UX, but it's not centralized. It actually maintains decentralization. TEEs are like a very crucial part of that. We haven't talked a lot about TEEs, so that's maybe a little bit more unfamiliar to our audience. Could you guys provide kind of a high level explanation of TEEs in general, and then talk about the role that TEEs play in Rollup-Boost and why it helps to maintain rollup decentralization while also providing fast UX?
Happy to, yeah. So TEEs are trusted execution environments. That's where the acronym comes from. And they're really interesting because it gives us the opportunity to escape this kind of trade-off dilemma that we have between UX and decentralization by introducing a new point on the trade-off curve that literally did not exist before. There's no other way to get this other than using a TEE. If you want to have decentralization, performance, and privacy, there's no other technology that can get you this other than TEEs, and I'll tell you why. TEEs give you two really interesting guarantees. One is on integrity. With a TEE, you can actually have a guarantee on exactly down to the hash of the code of what is being executed inside of a TEE. You can verify that a certain program is running, and as such, you know how your information is being processed. You know exactly how this TEE is going to handle your information or your code or interact with you, which gives you some really interesting properties in the context of crypto. As an example, you know that this rollup is going to sequence your transactions in a certain way, or it's not going to share your transaction before it includes it on-chain. That's the first property that's interesting. Second property that's interesting is privacy. So TEEs, they have a level of privacy even from the party that is operating the TEE. If you have the physical TEE itself, you can't see inside of the TEE and take the information that's inside of it outside, unless it is programmed specifically to do that. And what this gives us is the ability to decentralize things that otherwise previously were reliant on some form of social trust to maintain privacy. That really matters in the context of an L2 because users want these private mempools where no one else can see their trade before it lands on chain. As such, no one can front run them. The final thing that I'll add here before passing the mic off to Hasu is that TEEs do all of this with a minimal amount of performance overhead. So there are other ways that you can get some level of decentralization guarantees and integrity and privacy, but they're pretty slow, like ZK proofs as an example, or fully homomorphic encryption. But TEs, by using this form of special hardware, you get close to no performance overhead. So we've been running mainnet ETHL1 block builders, which is a really performance-minded use case in TEs for some time, and in practice we're seeing something like 5% performance overhead from doing so, in return for these integrity and privacy guarantees that you get. Hasu, you have anything to add to that?
Imagine if the world's GDP moved on chain. Guys, say GM to SafeNet. The newest protocol by Safe isn't a blockchain and it's not a new layer 2. It's a transaction processing network built to send money anywhere and swap anything on thousands of layer 2s from a single universal balance in sub 500 milliseconds. It's fast, it's smooth, and it's simple. And it's built with safe multi-sig level security in mind. SafeNet unlocks smart accounts across multiple chains, allowing users to supercharge security, scalability, and speed. So get started today at net.safe.global and remember to follow @safe on X. Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
No, I think it was spot on terms of the TE. I think we can connect it to the idea of an MEV auction, right? So what do TEs provide? It's integrity and privacy. And the ability for you to run code, run untrusted code on someone else's machine, right? Which is extremely powerful. What do MEV auctions need? They also need integrity and privacy. Integrity, why? Because a lot of auction types require you to trust the auctioneer. Why? And what does it mean? It means that the auctioneer is basically not inserting their own orders, or reading into the orders of the participants, or censoring any orders, and that they're picking the right winner, that they're distributing the good according to a predetermined algorithm that's fair and that's known to all parties. The other thing is the privacy, right? Is that the idea that, that the orders that you submit, the bids that you submit to the auction, are not only private from the operator, but also private from the other participants, right? Because, otherwise you might bid for something and somebody else reads the order and that slightly outbids you, right? For a good auction, you need these two properties. And the third one that we've already talked about is latency, right? So we know how to do integrity in crypto. We know how to do privacy. But we have no idea how to put them together for what it's worth, because privacy is very hard. Privacy over shared state is even harder. Privacy under low latency is a completely unsolved problem in crypto, because all of the techniques that we do know either not decentralized and they take forever, right? Like FHE. I think this is why really TEs are this perfect match for, I would say not only perfect match, it's really the only match. It's really this, there's no alternative to addressing these problems without the idea of basically going to trusted hardware.
Just to put a final T on this, My high-level mental model is that because they have integrity and privacy guarantees, TEs allow you to outsource computation to untrusted parties, which in turn gives us the ability to decentralize components of infrastructure that previously required these centralized trusted actors, like centralized sequencers.
Got it. Just gonna throw a curveball here. I was at I was at DevCon, and obviously Unichain was like a hot topic. And I believe I was talking to a Rollup founder, ZK Rollup founder, and they were particularly concerned about the trade-off spectrum of using TEs to the extent of the reality of there being, and I might butcher this, you might have to help me, there being a secret key that is stored in a private place that if the information is leaked and you have some sort of use of force to obtain this key without others knowing, then you have this massive advantage of transaction ordering, or you have visibility into what is happening into the TEE. So I don't know if I got that right, or and I'm not trying to incite anybody to search for the Unichain secret key or whatever it is, but like, could you maybe explain the scenario of the security and the trade-offs of using the TEEs? Because I understand that like the benefits now, but I think what that comes with these benefits also comes with some different levels of trade-offs that I think we should be transparent about.
Happy to, yeah. So I think that's absolutely a concern. TEEs are trusted execution environments, and the trust comes from needing to trust the manufacturer of the hardware. So in the case of using something like Intel SGX or Intel TDX is what we primarily develop on top of, there is a secret key that Intel has injected as a part of the manufacturing process. And it does require some degree of trust in Intel. That is a trade-off that in the short term we think is acceptable to make because of what it buys you. So today, if you want to run a centralized sequencer in an untrusting environment and do things like MEV auctions, there's no alternative to TEEs. You can't use zero-knowledge proofs for that. You can't use fully homomorphic encryption or multi-party computation, something like that. There's no pure cryptography solution right now that gives you the level of performance that you need. And in practice, a party like Intel is sufficiently disinterested in the MEV market or in the L2 market that I think it's not a credible threat today, especially because Intel wants to sell these things, right? And so they would be more than happy to if crypto was driving the adoption of their hardware, and they would even be aligned with it, not wanting to screw around with transaction ordering to extract $100,000 of MEV and blow up their next golden goose for this trusted hardware. So there is really this trust guarantee, but we think in the short term it's something that is an okay trade-off because it in turn buys us the ability to decentralize the stuff that is centralized today. The final thing that I would add here is that we at Flashbots are trying to layer on defense in depth. And so to the extent that we can, we want to use both TEEs and cryptography to provide the maximal amount of decentralization that we can in these situations. And there's a lot of contexts in which you, even if you can use MPC under your performance constraints or something like that, you're going to want to constrain parties within MPC or zero-knowledge proof, something like that, with TEEs because it just increases the cost of attacking a system in the abstract. And so we're not purists. We don't think TEEs are sort of the only solution. We do think they're the best in the short term. And in the long term, we think defense in depth is the best thing to pursue anyway.
I would have two things to add to that. So, first of all, using a TE for MEV related things is, or rather, let's take a step back. There's different things you can do with a TE that have different levels of risk. So if you store your private key in a TE, and then the TE gets broken into, your private key can be abstracted, and your money will be gone. Okay, so in theory, I mean, what is a rollup doing, right? I mean, a rollup is basically like processing transactions off chain, and then it's posting the data to the layer. Like it has a bridge contract that it's storing funds into. It's making a proof that the transactions were basically processed correctly, and it's posting the proof to the layer one to convince the layer one bridge to unlock the funds when people want to withdraw. Like you could have a completely TEE based rollup, right? Where effectively you're making a proof in a TEE, and the TEE basically says to the layer one, I attest to you that these transactions were processed correctly. And this has all these nice properties because it can be completely real time. Like you can literally, like Justin Drake is often talking about the idea of we can have synchronous composability if only we have two things, shared sequencing and same block, ZK proving, right? So you can actually convince the layer one bridge in real time that what happened on the layer two is actually valid from the perspective of the layer one. With the TEE, you can do that today. Like you can, you can convince the layer one bridge that the layer two transaction was valid, but at this point, the whole bridge is basically custodial inside the TEE, like functionally speaking, right? And so if the TEE gets broken into, that would be very bad. And all of those user funds would be lost. And so I would strongly kind of discourage putting like a layer one bridge effectively into a TEE today. However, when we talk about MEV, then what are we actually protecting here inside the TEE? It's not actually any user balances. It is information, right? Because a TEE, like an MEV opportunity cannot make a transaction that was invalid valid, or a transaction that was valid invalid, or something like that, right? All it can do is leak information about what people plan to do in the next, in terms of Ethereum, 12 seconds. In terms of Unichain, in the next 250 milliseconds. So what I am and other people are, seeking to do in the next 250 milliseconds, that is not a particularly, I mean, that has value. That's why we're doing it, but that is not disastrous if that gets broken. Okay. And so, that's like a really, like if you want to use TEs for everything, this is a perfect use case to do it because the risk of failure is not particularly high. So second, you were talking to this rollup operator and they were like expressing concern about using a TE for security in sequencer, right? But what are they doing today? It's all about comparing different options with each other. Like, is it better than the status quo? So I assure you what this rollup operator is doing today is they are running their own sequencer. How do I know that? Because every rollup is running their own sequencer, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So if you trust yourself, then using a TE is always better than not using a TE. Okay, because it's way easier to break into a centralized server than into a TE. Okay, and with a TE, you can actually attest to your users that you are not cheating those users unless you are also in cahoots with Intel. And that is a very strong promise to give. It's certainly much stronger than just the users having to trust you outright. And so yeah, okay. I have one more on open hardware. If you don't remind me to talk about that later, but go ahead.
Okay, we will remind you about open hardware later. My question is, how do we move? Okay, so we have centralized sequencers now. I think it's objectively an improvement to the status quo to run these centralized sequencers inside of a TEE. How do we go from centralized sequencer inside TEE to decentralized sequencer?
I think it kind of depends on what context that you want and what exactly you want to decentralize. So in the case of a chain with flash blocks, 250 millisecond block times, what we've thought about is reusing this set of TE operators that we have on L1 through something called BuilderNet, which we haven't talked about, but we can if you're all are interested in it. But basically, we have a set of people who are running TEs on L1 all around the world. And we thought about reusing that to have these parties rotate who is sequencing blocks inside of a TE over time, over different geographies. In the same sort of way that Solana does, actually, inspired by that. So you'd have one operator, they're running the TE sequencer for a period of some number of minutes, and then it's the leader changes to a different operator who's running the same thing in a TE, just from a different geography with a different entity. And that's sort of, I think, the very next step which gets you, many different parties that are sequencing the TEE, but still you're able to operate, with really high performance guarantees, the 250 millisecond block times. I think that's the very next incremental step. I don't know if Hasu has any other ideas to add to that, though.
Yeah, I would also connect it to Buildernet. Buildernet is our answer to how we seek to decentralize block building in the long term. And then when you talk about layer 2, then the answer is just use Buildernet, right? Like today, we just put the centralized sequencer in a TE, and that's the starting point. That's how we onboard those folks and give them more decentralization for the same or better user experience than they're used to. But yeah, the long-term answer is just go to Buildernet, because then, not only you get the same things, but you also will get interoperability, right? You will get basically shared block building. So if you have shared sequencing, that is only half of the equation. You need shared block building. So that the blocks that you actually build that then get mined on these chains, they're actually aware of, like they're actually contingent on blocks that are built on other chains. So you can have great properties like atomic cross-domain transactions and so on. And I would say, the key thing really, like we have talked about TEs in how to decentralize block building, right? And TEs allow you to run code on a person's machine who you don't trust. And this is the base primitive if you want to decentralize anything in MEV, because MEV is about basically like low latency computation of private data. And so if you can't run that code, if you can't send your information to someone else and have them process it in a way that you can trust, then you can for sure not decentralize MEV. You can for sure not decentralize MEV auctions. That's why, as I would say, as the base primitive of Buildernet is the ability to upload your code, your programs into TEs and have them run inside this network where they can talk to the code that other people have uploaded, and they can all operate on the same shared pool of transactions. So today, if you look, let's take 3 years ago, there was no private mempools, right? There was this big public mempool. Everybody was reading from it. Today, you have, I think 40-50% transactions are in different private mempools. They're increasingly very fragmented. And if you want to be a block builder, if you want to be a searcher, increasingly, like you need to buy transactions, right? You need to basically go to these different wallets and apps and so on, and you need to make deals with them to get the order flows. You can even operate in this market at all. And we think that this is a really inefficient for the market, really inefficient way of operating. And so we would love all transactions to be in the same pool again, but without any of the drawbacks that the public mempool had. So we want to have a big shared mempool, not just on one chain, eventually on all the chains, but transactions should be private, and anybody should be able to compute on them. And if they are able to make these transactions better and kind of increasingly form those transactions into basically bigger and bigger blocks, same as CowSwap is forming like transactions into a bundle, and then CowSwap bundle is background and MEV blocker, and then that bundle is being included by a builder who may like yet again reorder it in some way. And like this, how like the overall block kind of incrementally gets better and better, right? And so this is the process that we're trying to recreate. And the primitive that you need for that is TEs, and not just TEs, but the ability to upload your code to the TEs in a way that other people can trust.
I know it's not base sequencing, but I can't help but like be reminded by this idea of if we just have this global encrypted mempool for all L2s, then it's like it looks similar to like using the Ethereum validator set, or in this case, Buildernet, which is like a more distributed set of nodes compared to a centralized sequencer, to basically create this more maximally and sufficiently decentralized roll-up world. So very, very cool. And we have quite a few more questions about the specific tech side on the roadmap. But Hasu, I just want to have you fill in that point on open hardware before it gets left behind as we kind of look forward.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about kind of what is the end game around TEs, and I think Robert made the point very well that TEs are already, if they don't improve from today, they're already part of the end game. Why? Because they basically have no substitute, and even if other technology matures, if you have FHE, then basically you still need to split the key. So you need MPC. Okay, but MPC has an honest majority assumption. The majority of key holders in MPC can always decrypt the secret. And so you need at very least to put the different key holders into TE so you can trust this process at all under like what we're trying to do here, right? And so in the endgame already TE is a big part. But at Flashbots, and I would say we are part of a bigger initiative to create what we call open hardware. It's like open TEs. And it's this idea of looking in a highly systematic way at all of the different things that currently can go wrong about the way that TEs are designed and operated on, and trying to systematically improve them through hardware innovation. It's like going back to kind of your thesis of Peter Thiel and so on, that like we're only innovating in the world of bits, but not in the world of atoms, right? And this is like genuinely very, very hard stuff. This is operating very much in the world of atoms. And so Quintus Kilborn, one of our senior researchers, had a very good shout out. Quintus had a very good podcast on this that we can plug here. The podcast is called Into the Bytecode, and he's giving the full rundown on what we are doing with trustless TEs. And he's laying out that there's basically 3 attack vectors. So a TE can be attacked on the software level, can be attacked by the manufacturer, or it can be attacked by the supply chain. And like you can really, in a kind of systematic way, look at basically look at the current failure modes and then try to incrementally make them better. And I really encourage anybody to check out the podcast because it's the best resource that is out there right now. And I would say this is an extremely ambitious project that will take decades to complete. But there's a lot of things that we can do that are basically milestones on the path there. Every milestone is making the idea of TEs kind of better and more secure and more available and more diverse. And there's a lot that we can do as an industry. So I keep referencing the idea of the ZK moment. So ZK, zero knowledge cryptography was invented in like the 1970s or 80s, right? It's this very old kind of form of cryptography / encryption. And, it basically, because there was no real industry usage for it, it hasn't really caught on. It hasn't really improved for a very long time. And then here comes crypto, and all of a sudden there's this industry usage for this old technology that is almost forgotten, right? And all of a sudden so much funding, like so much intellectual capital, so much financial capital flows into academia and kind of research labs and industry labs around the idea of ZK. And all of a sudden we're making these crazy breakthroughs that are just blowing our minds about how much we can improve ZK, how much we can improve the hardware also around ZK, it's now not crazy that in 5 years we're going to actually have real-time ZK proving in crypto, which is a huge game changer. And it keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, probably by like an order of magnitude every 2 years. Don't quote me on that. But I think what we need is basically we need to build enough momentum, enough intellectual capital, and enough financial capital behind TEs to give TEs their own ZK moment. So we'll have a TE moment. And I think that is going to be such a huge level up for crypto. Fortunately, it's not only crypto, right? Because TEs have already gotten a lot of momentum from AI, right? There's so much money in AI, and AI really needs TEs because, basically, people don't want to trust, the TE operator, so the AI operator with their data, with their queries, basically. But then the operators don't want to trust the user to run it locally because they don't want to give away the training weights, right? Which is really the secret sauce in a lot of the AI. And so you have this huge coordination problem, and there's no way to solve it actually without TEs.
Very interesting.
Yes. So they are, listen to that podcast because it's fantastic. And And so this, for them also, they are looking at TEs as the only solution to this. They have no other solution. So all of a sudden, hundreds of millions of dollars are flooding. I think, already NVIDIA has announced that they are working on their own TE chip specifically for AI. And so, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars are going to flow into TEs, all with the incentive of making them better. Of course, crypto, I think, and MEV specifically, may have slightly kind of different things that we want out of this. And so I think it's going to be very important to align the different people who all want to make TEs better, and kind of, align them also around like what we need to make sure that all of the capital that's gushing in from AI and so on is put to the best possible use that's making TEs better for everyone.
What's funny is that TEs aren't new per se. Like, they've been around, but I think Flashbots kind of brought this resurgence of TEs back onto like the mind share per se. So props to you guys for kind of pushing that forward. Rob, I think you had some questions about the roadmap, specifically some of like the co-processing things, the multi-VM. It feels like what this is doing is like the Rollup-Boost roadmap almost is like going in parallel to like how teams should be, like rollup operators should be thinking about their own roadmaps. So keen to understand some of that.
Yeah. And one more question on BuilderNet and kind of how you guys are thinking about the decentralization of block building before we get into multi-VM and some of the roadmap components. There was a divergence that I noticed between two very smart people, Vitalik and I think Hasu, you put it out, but on behalf of Flashbots, and how Vitalik put out his end game piece, and it talked about how block building could be very centralized, and that's okay, as long as block validation was very decentralized. But you guys didn't see eye to eye, because from your perspective, from what I gather, not only does block validation have to be decentralized for a decentralized system, so does the block production. And so, when Vitalik put out Endgame, I don't think TEEs were as ubiquitous as they are now. But how do you see things? Like, how do you reconcile that? And generally, could you kind of like walk us through why you believe that block production must be decentralized?
Yeah. So first of all, I think so. Vitalik let's connect this to another post that Vitalik has put out. It's called On Decentralization. I think it's from 2018-19. It's pretty old, but it basically breaks down, decentralization into logical centralization and decentralization, and architectural centralization and decentralization. And so he's giving an example of a system that is logically centralized, but architecturally decentralized. And that is Ethereum itself, right? There's a single piece of state that is replicated across all of these machines, but everybody's working on the same piece of state, right? And I think you could argue with like rollups, it's logically decentralizing, but this is what is causing the fragmentation also in the user experience, right? So you can, this is such a good example because you can see the benefit of logical centralization, which like Solana is all about logical centralization. You get these great like benefits in terms of the UX for the app developer and the user, but you run into like these scaling limits, right? And then when you have logical decentralization, the system can scale, way better. You get other benefits also, like Ethereum has in terms of like innovation. Like every rollup is innovating, every rollup is raising its own money and acquiring its own users, and every rollup is different from every other rollup, right? So it's like Justin Drake calls it like Ethereum's like BD department, right? And I think he's not wrong about that. That is definitely the bull case for Ethereum kind of rollup centric roadmap. And so when Vitalik talks about the endgame, he's basically laying out two things. So he's saying that block building is very logically centralizing. And so that means that at the endgame, like over time, block building is bound to happen in one logically centralized entity. And so they, why is it? Because for a lot of reasons, like having order flow begets having more order flow. There's economies of scale. There's cross-domain MEV, like sequencing all of these chains in the same auction. The barriers to entry just get higher and higher. And this, like, we completely agree with this. Flashbots has put out many posts arguing that block building is very centralizing, and we need to act in order to protect, to take certain actions in the supply chain to keep it more decentralized. work towards this like North Star of making block building decentralized, right? So we're completely seeing eye to eye with them on that. What he's saying in his post is even if this happens and block building basically is architecturally centralized also, Ethereum is not, because that is this is the baseline assumption. Like block building is going to be logically centralized. But if it's also architecturally centralized, Ethereum is still not doomed, is what he's saying, right? It's not great, but there's things we can do. We can constrain this entity with things like inclusion lists and very cheap validation and stuff like that, right? And completely agree with them. I think we are more bullish than he was at the time, right? At least that we can also decentralize block building architecturally. And we're starting to have pretty good arguments, I think, around that. I think with the idea of BuilderNet and the rise of TEs, and just the idea that you can have a kind of market-driven system where people are incentivized to upload their innovations, their alpha, in order to search on a pool of shared order flow. I think this is a unique insight that just didn't exist a couple of years ago, and the technology to do it. I mean, it sounded more like magic to be able to do that, right? You just tell me everybody can upload their own source code, and they are not giving away their intellectual property, and they can all search on the same order flow. 3 years, we always thought, that's what we need, and the only way to do it is TEs. So like Flashbot strategy in that sense is like very simple, like make TEs better, and then like build the system where this kind of decentralized block building can happen, right? But this is how I would, kind of consolidate these different views.
One thing that I would follow up and add to that and connect it to some other topics within the space right now is that basically everybody, whether that's Vitalik or us or even folks like Max Resnick, seem to agree that you want to involve as many parties as possible within block production. And that's kind of a overall umbrella that unites a lot of these different directions. And so in the end game, Vitalik puts forward the idea that, okay, maybe block production is centralized in these big builders or sequencers, but then we constrain them by having the proposers play a role too through things like inclusion lists. And inclusion lists are just getting a new actor involved in building a block by having them propose a portion of what ends up being included by the builder. So you go from having this kind of monolith where it's only the builder creating a block to now it's two entities, albeit the proposers are doing a small part of it. And we think we're even taking that idea to its logical extreme, where it's not just the proposer and the block builder, but it's many, 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 many different parties as a part of the block building process contributing to how a block is built. And that's where you both get the most efficiency and the most interesting features, the most value back to users and proposers, but also where censorship resistance will come from in the end. And that's all united by this idea of let's get as many people as possible involved, or at least more people involved in the process of creating a block.
I don't mean to just completely play devil's advocate here, and we've only got about 10 minutes. I'd like to talk about the roadmap, but couldn't it also be argued that by adding more players into the block building process, you just consistently are adding more centralization vectors throughout that process? While you're adding more entities to the production of a block, every additional entity comes with its own set of trade-offs or its own set of vectors of centralization. Like, wouldn't it maybe be better to think backwards on that? Or what would be your kind of rebuttal to that claim?
What would thinking backwards mean? Maybe before we
like basically, instead of trying to add more entities to the block building process, why don't we go back to less entities and deal with the trade-off set at that stage versus trying to add more and then dealing with either more centralization vectors and trying to patch those, or even having unknown ones that we can't foresee because of the additional players in the block building process?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? So, I mean, I think what you're describing is like you have this one, you just like this one entity that's basically building blocks, right? That's, it has its algorithm, and as long as it has, enough orders, basically, then, it's going to build it's going to build a block that maybe people are like somewhat happy with, right? And if you can actually set your mind on something that you think is simple enough, like that hits a good balance between like simple and efficient, it's much easier to decentralize that. And so we earlier mentioned, Max Resnick. So, I mean, the idea of this like multiple concurrent proposers, so you have these different proposers, they all run basically forks of Ethereum, these like shadow chains. And they all basically run like a very kind of a deterministic block building algorithm, I would say, that can be very simple. It basically just orders transactions by the gas price. And as long as there's, one, I don't remember how it works exactly, but it's like creating censorship resistance as long as like some number of parties has basically, is like engaging in like the honest ordering of these transactions. So I mean, this would be an example of like almost quote unquote like enshrining block building, right? We are talking about enshrining like PBS, and you can go a step further. You can even enshrine like if you have censorship resistance. So if you can establish a shared list of transactions that everybody's starting with, everybody's seeing the same transactions, then you can force the node to construct the same block from that by using the same algorithm. Because everybody can like rerun the algorithm and see if it gets the same outcome. And if it doesn't, then the block is invalid, right? And so that would be like an example of doing that. And so this idea that you're proposing, it exists. It has intellectual capital behind it, right? Maybe less so now that Max is working Solana, but like in Ethereum that is. So, but the idea is fair, right? Like people are like seriously like considering this. So the reason why I would say we find ourselves on the other side of the spectrum is that when you are by making the auction less efficient for the participants, you're giving up more than you think. So this goes back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is if you're not running an explicit MEV auction, you're going to run an implicit one, right? And so you go back to this very simple transaction ordering algorithm, and while you technically think it's fine, because it does arrive at some ordering, and it has some nice properties for apps and so on, but it gives sufficient room still for searchers to express their views about the state of the next block through latency auction, through spam auction, and you can be sure they will use these things, and they will drive centralization in Ethereum, and they will cause negative externalities in Ethereum. This is one side of the argument. And then the other problem that you have is when you have a very rigid system, the MEV market is changing all the time. It has changed many times, like even in the 3.5 years that I've been working at Flashbots. And so, like the system needs to evolve. It needs to be market driven. It needs to be able to incorporate new information, new techniques of better serving users, better serving validators. And if you can't do that, then it will be very hard to build a system that can be robust to disruption. And so I think those two are kind of the starting point for why we think, like the system needs to be inclusive of many different parties. It is to prevent, like it needs to be complex enough to support an MEV auction, but it needs to be market driven enough to basically survive for like multiple rounds of the meta game. I'm curious, Bert, do you have anything to add?
I would just add that I think we can do this in a way that doesn't add a bunch of new roles or actors in the MEV supply chain. I think, Andy, what you were touching on in part is that the MEV supply chain just seems to get endlessly more complex with like different types of actors, boxes that are stacked before each other. And what I would say,
in fact, Robert,
is,
I was hanging out with a crypto engineer girl, and we were having some drinks, and she was questioning my technicality about whether or not I'm a good podcast host. And she was like, describe to me the MEV supply chain. And I was struggling a little bit. She was laughing at me. So this is where the question stems from, I'd say.
Yeah. You got to study MEV before you go get a drink with that crypto engineer girl next time. Sounds like you might have embarrassed yourself a little bit, but that's
just
okay.
A bit. Anyway, continue there.
Yeah, I mean, so where where introducing these entities come from is because people don't trust each other in the MEV supply chain. So a block builder will have a really valuable block, but they don't know who a random proposer that spun up their validator last week is. So how do these two parties get to work together? Well, they use the intermediary of a relay who acts as a trusted third party that mediates between the two. But if we have some form of trustless collaboration between parties, then we don't need these intermediaries. And if we have some level of programmability and open competition, then you don't need to just keep on layering on new actors in the MEV supply chain. So we're really excited about this idea of letting people upload their private code instead of a TEE and being able to give some kind of trust guarantees to enable collaboration between untrusted parties. Right now, the primary way to do that is by introducing new boxes that then get you embarrassed when you go and have a drink with a girl at some point. So we're not introducing more boxes in the MEV supply chain. We're trying to enable more open, permissionless innovation within the existing builder role to collapse all the boxes down into one, while still letting untrusted parties collaborate together because of the guarantees that you get from TEEs. So you may end up just with one big box. It's a decentralized network.
One big box of many small boxes all running on the same decentralized substrate for private code execution.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's what my answer is going to be next time, Hasu. Thank you for that.
Guys, I mean, we got just a couple minutes left, and we wanted to talk a bit about the roadmap for Rollup-Boost and where you guys are headed. There's two boxes that are checked here: the 250 millisecond flash blocks, and the second box is the verifiable priority ordering. And then there's a lot of other boxes here. One of the that gets us excited is multi-VM rollups. Others like inclusion guarantees, parallel execution are also pretty exciting. Maybe you could just, touch on a couple of these that you feel are most relevant or coming the most quickly or the most important milestones in this roadmap.
Why don't I touch on TE proofs and you do the multi-VM? Yeah, so one of the things that you didn't mention that I'm personally very excited about is the idea of TE proofs. And I want to follow up on it because I was riffing on that a little bit earlier, right? I was using the, TE proofs as an example of something you should actually not do, like put a secure rollup bridge, basically unlock it through like a TE proof, right? Because if you have that, only then basically your entire bridge deposits are secured by the TE. However, if you kind of look at where the rollups are today, rollups have, Layer 2 Beat and Vitalik have put out this grading system for rollups, right? Where if you want to actually go to stage 2, right, you need to have made your proving system permissionless, right? And I think there's something about a security council, I think also. So the idea is basically that the prover that unlocks the bridge, it should be permissionless, right? It should not be controlled by the operating team. And turns out that's surprisingly hard to do. And it's true for both actually the fraud proof and the ZK proof type of system for different reasons. But what they both have in common is it's very, very new technology and it's very complex. So the oldest fraud proving system, Arbitrum, has only been live for 1 year. The oldest ZK system, even less so, and ZK map is very hard to audit, and we were quite far away from actually being comfortable, locking like a few $1 billion behind this code alone, and so we just haven't seen enough edge cases. We just haven't seen it break enough. We don't have enough Lindy effect stacked on top of these solutions to really trust them. That's why it'll probably take some time for these rollups to kind of fully mature and actually become fully non-custodial from the perspective of the layer 1. And that is holding back adoption of these systems, right? Because when you're depositing to these chains, you have to trust the operator, right? That's like, this is not what you want. And so this is where TE Boost comes in. This is where TE proofs come in, because the way that we suggest using it is not actually to replace your existing optimistic or ZK proving system, but actually use what we call a multi-prover system. And you can think of a multi-prover system as where the bridge is effectively not, you guys probably, if you're doing a lot of on-chain trading, I hope you have, a safe or an Argent wallet. And the idea behind that is just that, you want to have, a 2FA, like a 2 of 1, like, so not 2 of 1, 1 of 2 or 2 of 2 or 2 of 3, some kind of multi-signature setup, right? Where you need at least 2 signatures to unlock a transfer. And you can apply the very same concept to bridges. Right now, a bridge is a one of one multisig, basically, right? But we can make it a 2 of 2 multisig if you add another proof. So you can use optimistic and ZK proving, and then you probably have the risk. So you can design a system that the way that you need the optimistic proof and the ZK proof to actually agree for the bridge to be unlocked and the funds to be withdrawn. And if the proofs disagree, then the governance can kick in. But you can also use a TE for the same purpose, right? So you can have like a combination of an OP prover and a TE prover, or ZK prover and a TE prover. And what you're getting through that is you're getting the additional security. It's purely additive, because if the TE proof is wrong, it doesn't matter unless the OP proof is also wrong, and they're completely different implementations. So there's like nothing that can cause them to basically fail simultaneously. That is where you can blame the TE for that, basically, right? And so it's a way of making these bridges, better and elevate rollups to stage 2 faster, so we can, they can basically level up the security guarantees and get more users and get more TVL. And so this is something that, we are very excited about. And that we're working on with several partners. Basically hope to have something here within, the next 1 or 2 quarters. And then Bert, what about the multi-VM?
Multi-VM is very interesting. The notion is, what if you can have Sequencer in its TE running an alternative VM, kind of as a sidecar, and then let users on-chain interact with that VM in the normal way that they do through smart contracts that tell the sequencer how to interact with the alternative VM. That may have sounded a little bit convoluted, but as a user, you interact with the special smart contract on chain, and then that tells the sequencer, hey, run this program inside of the alternative VM that you have. And that would allow us to, allow rollups to give their developers new tools to build new types of applications, like deploying your Rust code in a WASM VM that is running as a sidecar next to the sequencer and enabling a whole set of applications that right now you can't do because you're constrained by Solidity. And the more general idea here is how do you use these TEs in the sequencer as a co-processor, do more interesting off-chain computation to give developers superpowers that they don't have right now. One other idea that I will throw out there that we're excited about is, what if you could allow developers to call a special smart contract that makes an HTTP request, and then the sequencer can return the result on chain and in a smart contract so that it's available for developers. And so you could have a smart contract.
Could even return it in a transaction that you have yet to process, right? During the block building process.
Right. So the way it could work is you're users making a transaction to a smart contract that has this special, HTTP request function that is called, and the sequencer injects their own transaction before the users to provide the result of that HTTP request, so then it's available for the transaction when it executes. And you can do a bunch of interesting stuff like that. Like you could have your smart contract calling out to ChatGPT, and then build apps on chain that have access to ChatGPT. So we're super excited about this idea of how do you use a sequencer as a processor to enable the next generation of apps.
I'm more of a Claude guy myself, but to each their own, sir.
Yeah. We can make it drag and drop. So Claude, ChatGPT, Grok. Here at Flashbots, we support all LLMs. We're not waiting
You're
in that war.
agnostic to the LLMs. That's bullish, Flashbots.
We're hedging our bets. We don't want to play any favorites just in case one of them wins. You don't piss off the wrong LLM.
Yeah.
The one thing that I want to add, I know that we're coming up on time, but on the roadmap is that we're really interested in pushing the boundaries of performance for rollups and making it really easy to be able to do so. So the first thing that we're doing there is flash blocks. Again, this is scaling infrastructure because you need to clean up the toxic waste that is MEV on-chain spam for an off-chain option. But on the roadmap, I think you were hinting to stuff like parallel execution, where we want to get even deeper inside of how the chain works and enable things like a parallel EVM just through an extension that you can access through Flashblocks, or things like on-demand TEL3s that help with your chain congestion. As you need, spin these things up and down.
And is that the example that you were pointing to earlier with Uniswap, like in times of high volatility, spinning up this kind of like layer 3 environment and then collapsing back down? Is that an example of that?
Yeah, exactly. Because if you are on a rollup today and there's a lot of volatility on a major pair, ETH, USDC, or something like that, you're going to have a ton of SexDex ARB. That's going to use up your block space. And then suddenly people who are playing a game in some other completely unrelated part of your block space have higher fees. And that's not a great user experience for them either. So if you can have these on-demand TEL3s, we can both offer people who, are targeting really congested block space super low fees. You can also help to isolate fee markets so that you can maintain the user experience across these different things that ultimately don't really matter. While keeping them composable in the times that you don't need these on-demand TEL3s.
Yeah, and NFT mints are another great use case for that.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we keep coming back to, I was saying if we can have the TEE moment for crypto, it's going to change so many things in terms of the security, but also like the expressivity of the chain and user experience and the privacy and those things. And this is really, I think, what we're trying to give a glimpse of with the introduction of Rollup-Boost is that you can actually, like, if you are willing to look beyond software innovation, and if you're willing to leverage hardware that like runs alongside your regular system, that there's so many things that you can do. And I think this really can change a lot in crypto.
Crypto's TEE moment. I think we've just found the thumbnail title. Thank you, Hasu. And thank you guys for joining today's podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. A lot of technical topics. I think that we did a really good job of explaining them because I understood about 95% of it. So that is a good sign. Guys, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Pleasure is all ours. Thank you for having us. Cheers.